Welcome back to part two of How Do You Spell That? So, we kind of talked a little bit about Leanna's diagnosis journey and my getting involved in the rare disease world. Now, at the time that Leanna was diagnosed, I was in a graduate program. I was getting a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling, and my intent was to be a high school guidance counselor, particularly because this is near and dear to my heart. I've always kind of had a soft spot for public education. I was not particularly thrilled with the guidance that I had received when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I really struggled severely with depression and my grades were slipping, and honestly, nobody caught it. I went from being an honor roll student to failing classes. And that was when dealing with everything that was going on in my household and depression, anxiety, and all of the things. So I wanted to be what to someone what I did not have for myself. So I was going along, we got this diagnosis and I kind of, had a little bit of a breakdown. I mean, there's no nice way to put it. So after we received her diagnosis, it just so happened that the Hermansky-Pudlak Syndrome conference was happening within a couple weeks, and it was only a 2.5 hour drive from our home. And my husband said, we're going. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, we're going. And, we went up there and we had been given kind of like a brief overview from genetics about what her condition entailed. And if I haven't mentioned that before, I apologize. So, Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome is a rare genetic disorder. It is characterized by albinism, which is a lack of pigmentation in the hair, skin, and eyes. Also, a decreased visual acuity. Vision can range from average is normal is 20/20. Their vision can range anywhere from 20/80 to about 2800. Obviously, there's some variations. Just for reference, 2200 is legally blind, which is what my daughter is. It's a bleeding disorder, so all subtypes have the bleeding disorder. And basically, it's where the platelets are, they're not, there's the correct amount of platelets in the blood. They're just not formed properly. So a normal platelet looks like a chocolate chip cookie. It has little specks in it, and those are the things that help release chemicals that when you cut yourself, they release chemicals so that, the bleeding will stop eventually and it will clot. In those with Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome, it does not do those things. And it looks like a sugar cookie because it doesn't have the dense granules in that. So that's the hallmark and basically how people get diagnosed with HPS without a genetic test. Um, Not to get too science and nerdy, but her mutation, she has a base pair duplication. Some people have a deletion in that particular set of code. Now, mind you, I'm learning all this, and one reason I got into psychology is because I'm not a math science person. My degree is in psychology. My husband is in computer science. So we kind of got a crash course in medicine, which kind of lets you know how stubborn I am and how much I just have to know things. So, anyways, we get to our first conference and we had not kind of gotten all the specifics. Some about 30% of individuals with HPS do develop a Crohn's-like ulcerative colitis, bowel disease, which is not a good thing when you have a bleeding disorder because that leads to other complications. Um, and subtypes 1, 2, and 4 also develop pulmonary fibrosis. There's no cure and there's no treatment other than a lung transplant, and lungs are actually the hardest organ to actually make sure that you have and to transplant. So this is our first conference, um, and we were sitting in a room with other parents, and actually they called it HPS 101 was the session, and this was the first time that definitively somebody had said, all individuals with HPS type 1 will develop pulmonary fibrosis. And that was the first time we'd heard it because genetics kind of danced around it a little bit for us. And I am not an emotional person by nature. As part of my upbringing, I was definitely raised by parents who said, if you want to cry, I'm going to give you something to cry about. And emotions were definitely frowned upon in my household. So I'm not one to cry or outwardly show very strong emotions. Um, especially around other people. And I kind of, I looked at my husband, he looked at me, he knew immediately that I was going to lose it. And I'm like, I have to get out of this room, like immediately. I did make it out of, this was in a conference hotel. So we were in one of like the little conference rooms and I made it out of the room into the hallway and I dropped to my knees, sobbing, just hysterical. And mind you, at this point, my husband and I had only been together for a couple of years. That'll be another story for another YouTube video, I guess, or podcast or whatever. And he had never seen me like this, and he was absolutely beside himself. And thankfully, this conference, the parents are attending the family sessions, and the kids kind of have their own conference with childcare. So that gave me some space for this. And we went up to our hotel room where we were staying, and I probably sobbed for 3 hours, constant. I mean, I still don't know. He's like, I didn't know what to do with you other than, we just laid there. He held me and I cried. And at the end of the night, I dried my tears, got together, and our conference is always kind of, we have our family session. Saturday night is always a big celebration and a dinner. It's like I can't even explain it to you. Like it's just a huge, huge thing. And there's all these people there, and they're happy and they're celebrating, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, how can we sit here and celebrate when this horrible thing is happening? And as the night wore on, I kind of started to get it. It's like, and it's kind of like what I say too now in my approach to coaching and mentoring is that even in the midst of all the things, the worst possible news you can get, there's always a path forward. Might not be the path that you would like, that you would choose, or that you expected to be on, but there is a path forward. And I think in that night, it was the beginning of the path that was formulating in my head. Now, I had obviously been on a path before. I was very, very concerned about social justice. I had worked in corrections, I had worked in mental health. And now I had been given a new role as a rare disease mom who would eventually become a special education mom. And, we went home that Sunday, and Monday morning, I called the office back and I spoke to Donna Appel, who is the executive director of the HPS network. And I said, put me to work. And that was in 2013. Famous last words, as we say, because, you generally find those who are willing to kind of answer the call. It's a thing. And I have been very proud of the work that I have done since. And I think that it has definitely launched and prepared me to do what I needed to do, as my life progressed. Now, at that time of receiving that diagnosis, obviously, I had not healed from my own childhood traumas, and I was still navigating all of that while navigating a new marriage, while navigating a baby with a rare disease. And it was a lot, but it it got better. It got easier, and it gave me a passion and a voice for sure. So on that note, I will probably make this a part 3 of how do you spell that again. So until then, stay tuned.